What's up, gamers? So, Victoria 3. It's not just a meme anymore, apparently. For anyone who's come across this and it's like, what are you even talking about? Who are you? Victoria 3 is the sequel to Victoria 2, a game which I've played a few hours in. You know, maybe 1,400 and however many hours. Most played game I've got on Steam. So, I've got a bit of experience with that game. I like that game a little bit. It's alright, you know? It's alright. Come back to it every now and then. I also had a bit of experience doing some modding with that game as well. And so, when I hear that Victoria 3, a game that has been in non-existence for a very long time, and suddenly, you know, I don't know if it was earlier today or yesterday that something got leaked about this dev diary for Victoria 3, and people were saying, oh, is this real or not? Well, apparently it is real. And it's not just a dev diary, they even have the Steam page up. Planned release date to be announced, but yeah, let's take a look. So this isn't a gameplay trailer or anything, it's just like a, oh, look at the theme.
The people planted seeds of revolution. Visionaries of commerce and diplomacy electrified the world, and sparks of inspiration flew towards the sky. Up.
So I've already got some thoughts
Over the
just looking
smokestacks
at some of this stuff.
rose a promise of a grand tomorrow.
So obviously that doesn't tell very much by itself because it's not gameplay, but we do have screenshots coming up in a second that we can look at. So for now, and that's also, look here, airship. What kind of game is this going to be? Because Victoria 2, for anyone who doesn't know, in the dev diary, you know, the brief scan I've given of it seems to hint at this a little bit. It's a game that looks like a war game, but actually is more like a population and economics and politics management game. And it takes place obviously in the Victorian-ish period. It actually starts slightly before and ends slightly later. I think it's 1836 to 1936, which is the same as it says just here. It's very grounded in reality. Like, there's things that you can do that are unrealistic, like or things that didn't happen in history, but they're still realistic. It's things like, you know, what if the Mexicans had been able to fight off the Americans and stop them from taking, you know, pushing westwards? What would happen? Well, what would happen is, if they were successful enough, let's say the Mexicans ally the British, then the Americans lose their claim to those lands, right? That kind of stuff. What would happen if Prussia didn't get dominance over the German states? Well, you might not see a single united Germany, or maybe the way that Germany would be united would be different, because perhaps Austria would be the ones uniting Germany, or perhaps instead there would be a unification caused by rebellions. You know, let's say Prussia goes to war with Austria, loses horribly, and so there's like an uprising within Prussia, and those, you know, that uprising creates a new unified German state or whatever. You know, things that are within the realms of reality, even if they're not, you know, things that are ahistorical, but fairly realistic. And looking at this, and this, you know, it seems like they're going a different way. This entire logo looks very steampunky. I mean, it's a little design thing, but design, you do design because you're trying to get across a certain theming. And if we look at, no, that's not Steam, Victoria 2, the logo is very simple. And what do they show in the background? It's Bismarck, okay? And a lot of other stuff they have, you know, it's this very, they have some, you know, historical army fighting some other historical army that you don't expect them to fight, and that kind of stuff. It's stuff that's ahistorical but realistic. What they've got here is like kind of steampunky, and that's, I just don't like steampunk. And Victoria 2 was never a steampunk game. It was steam, but not punk. So screenshots, can we see? So right now, let me just move that screen a bit. So I haven't set this up very well. So I'll do this one bit at a time. So over here, let's take a look. So, this is the province view, it looks like, for the game that's been updated. And it's very difficult to really tell much from this. Infrastructure 60? Now, that could mean a few things. That could be in Victoria 2 you had things like railways, and this you had levels, which was a single number. Infrastructure, I'm assuming, is something like that. That would make sense. Infrastructure usage. However, that implies it's something else. I don't know how you could have infrastructure and infrastructure usage. Maybe as you build factories, it uses up some of that infrastructure, which is a limit on the amount, and so you have to build more railways to have more industry or something. Maybe it's just another way that another reason for having railways, because in Victoria 2 you use railways because it gives you resource bonuses. I think it gets per factory, but I've only got like 1.4 thousand hours in the game. There's no reason I would know everything that railways do, and yeah, that kind of stuff. Maybe this is another thing. It's like a hard cap or a soft cap or something on like how much industry you can make, which would be an interesting way of doing it, in my opinion, because in Victoria 2, every single state, as they call it, can have up to 8 different types of factories with a set level. I can't remember what the level is in the base game for how many you can have. So it doesn't matter what that state is. And a good example of this is it doesn't matter if you're talking about the entirety of Texas, which counts as one state, or Ulster, which counts as one state. They both have the same amount of industry that you can possibly build in them. Or even weirder when you have somewhere like, say, Mongolia, which has no people, and compare that to something like, say, Southeast England, which has a huge population, but again, they can have the same amount of industry. So maybe this, in some way, will relate to that, which might be good, but again, this is all speculation. Market access. We'll have to see. I'm sure I think there is a screenshot about market in a second, so we can take a look at that, and that might be more useful. GDP. Is this the proportion of GDP made by this province? Because 6.4% doesn't mean much. Does it give you like a relative, 6.4% of British GDP comes from this province? I don't know how that's useful, but taxation and expenses. I mean, that just sounds like what it sounds like, right? It's 10.7k. I'm just thinking, like, is that per day or per month? Because in Victoria 2, you get money stuff changes every single day, which is a bit different from, I think, EU4, another Paradox game where I think you get taxes every month or something like that. I think it's the same in Crusader Kings 2. I think it's every month-ish. And also taxes are a bit different in Victoria 2, because taxes, it's not like most games where it's just, at this point you just get some money from somewhere. In Victoria 2, it's actually like a sales tax, it operates like. So when pops buy and sell things, then the money is done on that transaction, and I can't remember whether it's the person who buys or the person who sells who pays. I think it's the person who buys who pays the tax on top. I don't know exactly how it works, but and then expenses. So yeah, that's something. Buildings. Now, I am blind, so I'm going to have to scoot on it close, and I can't tell what any of those symbols are supposed to be. I'm going to have to get in really close. Whoa. So, the one with the 3 next to it, I genuinely cannot tell what that's supposed to be at all. The 14 has got a 5, and a 2 next to them. It looks like there's a building. Food, it looks like. And then another building. which is interesting. My assumption there is that the numbers on the pictures themselves are on the top left corners of the pictures are maybe like the level of the factory that you'd have in Victoria 2. To the right of that, it looks like there's iron or something, and then maybe grain, and so fish, iron, and grain. So it looks like a state or a province or whatever. It's showing the different resources produced, and the way this is looking is it looks like it has a limit of 3, which is definitely interesting. It doesn't look like there's any room there to have more than 3, which is interesting because that would imply one of two things. Either these provinces we're seeing now are actually the provinces and not states, and so a province can have multiple productions, which honestly makes sense. Victoria 2, a province can only have one. Or these are like the states, and so that means resources are handled at a state level rather than a province level. And in fact, actually looking at that, I think that is probably, yeah, it makes sense that Ireland would be 4 provinces. That makes sense. Rather than... Although it doesn't make sense that parts of England, because there's a lot of England without labels on it. So actually, now I'm thinking that this is saying that resources are handled at a state level and that there are only 3 in every state, which is a bit weird. Again, we don't really know at all, so we'll have to see on that one. The next one says 40 and it looks like houses. Okay, so that's now making me a little bit worried, because that looks like a Stellaris-style housing system. Which is not really a problem with Stellaris, because that's Stellaris, it's a very different game. It's not trying to be Victoria, but remember this is the sequel to Victoria 2, and the idea of like having to manually build houses for provinces or something. It looks a little bit like there was a mod that I saw for EU4, I think, that tried to do some stuff that looks kind of like this, which is a bit concerning, not gonna lie. Because I don't want Victoria 2 being more like EU4. EU4 is one of my least favourite Paradox games, to be honest. And we'll probably talk about that more when we get into the dev diary, because there was one thing I did see that I mentioned. Next to that, we got obviously grain and something else that's kind of faded. And again, 12 of those, whatever they are. So that would imply that there... Okay, so there are more resources then? I don't know. So I guess there... It has... Okay, so I guess what it's saying there, and this is a guess, is... No, that wouldn't make sense. Okay, so in Victoria 2, the pops that produce stuff are broken into different types depending on different situations. Farms have farmers and non-farm things have labourers. So wheat or fish has farmers, whereas iron and sulphur and wood have labourers. However, something I noticed is that the grain on there is in a different category to the fish. What does that mean? I guess grain is just like generic food or something, which would be a bit sad because Victoria 2 had multiple types of food, and it does look like there's a second thing, like so there is a second type of food, but then why isn't fish put in that? Maybe it's not fish, maybe it's some kind of like naval supplies thing, which again doesn't make much sense. And then finally we have a small house, a big house, and a boat, probably a dockyard. I'm guessing that's going to be like the military. No, because only one of those is anyway military, the dockyard. It's very difficult to really tell what a lot of this stuff could be. But the fact that they have these single numbers next to them, and some of them have it on them as well, I'm pretty sure that the ones that mouse is over, these are probably factories, because they have the numbers over them. But why there's also a 14 next to it? Well, let me add up the numbers on them. No, that only adds up to 12, 552. So I don't know what the 14 means. Maybe it's a capacity. I don't know. Maybe this is like development in EU4. Please don't be like development in EU4. Then at the bottom here, it has population turmoil, which presumably is like the average militancy in Victoria 2, and I really hope that they have, again, kept that style of militancy system where it's done on a pop by pop basis and not on a province basis. I don't like Crusader Kings 3's faction system where you can like see all EU4's rebel system. I really don't like where it like builds, you see the thing build up over time and then it just fires at a, like, you know exactly when it's gonna fire thing. I like the idea of like, there's rebels, maybe you even know roughly how many there are, maybe you even know exactly how many there are. The part that makes it scary isn't that, it's the fact that it could happen at any time, and it doesn't tell you. Okay, maybe it has it hard-coded as to when it's going to fire, but it shouldn't tell you that, right? Maybe it could give you like a, we've got mutterings in the army of rebellion in a rough period. If you like do some stuff to try and get intelligence to look into that or whatever, maybe for some games, but for Victoria 2, what they had was, generally worked. There are problems with the rebel system. The main one, in my opinion, is that completely opposed rebels would always support each other, even when the ideals of those rebels are completely opposed to each other. Obviously, you got things like ideological rebels, but then you also got the national rebels who want to break away from the country, where the ideological rebels probably, in a lot of cases, would not want them to do that. Standard of living. That's probably a new thing. I mean, it is a new thing. It's definitely a new thing. I know it's a new thing. What it means, that probably has to do with one of the other screenshots we'll see in a second. And so, when we get to that, we will. Now, this is something that worries me a bit. Here it has three things: struggling, middling, and secure. For population. Now, why does that make me worry? Now, on its surface, it doesn't make me worry, because that could be a class thing. Just the previous lower class, middle class, upper class, just renamed. It could be that. That could also be like something similar to Victoria 2's, getting some of their life needs fulfilled, getting all of their life needs fulfilled, getting all of their everyday needs fulfilled. It could be something like that. Okay, looking at the images next to them, it looks more like the former than the latter. In either case, could be useful. The part that makes me a bit is that the number next to them is not a population number like what we see below. It's an exact number, which implies that this is more of a Imperator or Stellaris style of pop system, i.e. not really. And that does worry me, because the pop system in Victoria 2 it's not just something fun, it's what sets the game and the series apart, really. Okay, the pop system is really... And it's very weird, because here next to it, in Peasants, it has it in a way that fits that old system that Victoria 2 had. It says Peasants, so many. Now, it only says Peasants. In Victoria 2, you also had landowners working the land, and it showed that as a proportion of population. And not just saying peasants, but it also said how much work was available for them. So what does that mean? Maybe they're going to add more stuff to this box. I certainly hope so. Some of that stuff needs to be there. Oh, and something else. Next to the UK flag, they have a shield or something, which could mean anything. Now, other stuff that we can see on this screenshot that might be interesting. Obviously, on the left, you've got the little buttons that mean all the different things. So looking at that, the middle one there is, in the top 5, the middle one is factories. Below that's probably trade. Below that's some kind of war or military stuff. Above the factory is probably taxes and finances, and above that is probably government stuff, I'm guessing. Dove, well, that would normally be peace, so that's probably diplomacy. Lightbulb, innovations, inventions, technology. Smiley face, population happiness, looking at pops and stuff. Oh no, below that it actually has people, so that'll be pops. And below that is a books, that's probably help. And then there's something below that which I have no idea. Top, middle is standard way that Paradox games notify you of stuff. Top right, obviously, all the standard Paradox stuff. And then interest groups. Now this is the part I find interesting, because you'd assume interest groups, oh, is that like the different pop types? I don't know. Because this does look like, oh yeah, Anglican Church, that'll just be like your priests from Victoria 2. Petty bourgeoisie, that'll just be, what's it called? Artisans. I want to say small business owners, but they are small business owners, but artisans is what the game calls them. Right? We'll take a look at that in a second. Good old Qing China. So Chinese markets, 100%, whatever that means, probably how much of the world market they're eating up. Classic China. Most underproduced and most overproduced. That's something that was always in Victoria 2 and would appear at the top of the screen. Getting rid of that is actually annoying. It was always really nice in Victoria 2 that you could see some stuff live, like you could see what you were buying and selling the most live, you could see various different points live, you could see your taxation as a graph live, you could see your technology progressing live. Looks like they've taken a lot of that away. Bring it back, please. I know it made the interface look a mess and difficult for new people, I get that. But it was so useful. Now let's actually take a look. What are they underproducing? Underproduced. Grain, paper, alcohol, furniture, clothes, maybe luxury clothes. Overproduced wood, fish, tea, some kind of meat, and iron. So, okay, we do actually have different types of food. That's good. Actually, maybe? We don't know. It looks like it, but we can't really tell. You have 6 unused levels of trade routes in this market. No thank you. You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of something they added in the later Tropico games where you like manually set up trade routes and you have a specific number depending on like how many ships you have or how many ports you have or whatever. No thank you. Does that mean that someone who wants to play the laissez-faire thing, you know, having capitalists building stuff up, you can't really do that because you have to set up these trade routes? In something like EU4 that might make sense, you know, where mercantilism and all that kind of stuff is very high. And we're going to have to look at every single country to look at their markets and set up trade routes manually. Please no. Commanders, I mean, there's not much to say. It looks like it's just like a Fang Yang is 10 out of 10 and the other guys are 5 out of 10. It looks like. Alternatively, you have some kind of points and they get divided. So you only have one general, so he gets all 10 points, and the admirals you have 2, so you get 5 each. I don't know. And then bottom right is just the standard, here's some information about things that are going on that might be relevant to you. It's always nice to have. So, now we get onto the next screenshot, which has politics. The first politics doesn't look like politics at all, it's institutions, which looks more like technologies, to be honest. So you have a number of institution levels on the left. I'm guessing this is how many you have already bought. Bureaucracy cost / investment level, so presumably, what's this? That's not money, that's something else. Is that admin points? Because that doesn't look like money you're paying there. Bureaucracy cost per investment level, so presumably for every institution that you buy, one of these, presumably you have to pay extra something. So what have we got? Colony growth generation speed multiplier. Colony growth generation speed multiplier. Okay. So obviously, multiplier means it multiplies the colony growth generation speed. Speed means that you have something called colony growth generation. Colony growth generation. Colony growth generation speed. What speed colony growth is generated at? Why is colony growth given a value that just increases the speed? Is that like colonial migration rate or something? Like migration chance or migration rate that you had in Victoria 2? Is it more like the speed at which you set up a colony? Because in Victoria 2 the speed you set up colony is fixed, no matter what. So maybe that's what it means? But that would be like a very limited thing, so it feels more like it's the rate at which the colony... I don't know. I really hope it's not like a you wait some time and then it just becomes a better colony, or like it becomes more yours or whatever. I don't really know what it means by that. Colony growth. It makes me think that it's more like an EU4 style colony system where you set it up and then you have a variable amount of time depending on different factors, which could be useful, you know, that could be a nice thing. But again, that does seem very limited to, you know, only during specific time periods where you're actually making new colonies, and completely useless before and after. Social security. Industrialists gain political strength, and +2 minimum wealth. Minimum wealth. Okay, so that's interesting. So that makes it sound like each of your pops gets 2 money, presumably. I'm going to say pounds because that's what it was in Victoria 2. Everyone gains £2 every, what, day? I don't know if the numbers would add up or not. What we saw earlier with the Irish province or state or whatever that had plus 10.7k. Did the numbers add up on that? I don't know. Workplace Safety Office actually seems to be adding mortality for certain jobs, which is definitely interesting. The only thing that really had mortality in Victoria 2 were the soldiers, so adding it to other jobs, yeah. I mean, it technically makes sense. It's not something that you necessarily would need to have simulated in this kind of game. It's not something you really notice, but I mean, if it's something to add, I don't see it as being a bad thing to add. And dangerous working conditions. I guess that is like for events about dangerous conditions. Like you'd sometimes get these at random in Victoria 2. And presumably mods that add like safety laws would affect the chance that you'd get one of these. So maybe that would have, you know, impact that some way. Maybe it would also decrease militancy or something, potentially, or maybe if you get one of these events, then you gain some militancy and so that prevents that from happening. I don't know. Plus 10% education access. Yeah, that just sounds like it's like literacy rate kind of stuff. Or not literacy rate, but like literacy growth rate. The rate at which literacy increases. Something like that. Sounds like it. Plus 20% conversion. Makes it sound a lot more like religion's going to play more of a part, which is definitely interesting. Because in Victoria 2, religion was kind of like, it was there technically, but it did so little. So again, like the workplace safety stuff, adding it in, it doesn't really seem like it's a downside. It might be interesting. And devout political strength. Now that's also interesting. Notice what it says there, devout. Not priests or the church or something. Or church pops or whatever, but just devout, which is an interesting change. I don't know, I'm interested to see how that changes exactly. Does this mean there's something alongside the pops jobs? Are pops now... It seems like pops are now divided by something other than job. So being devout doesn't mean they're a priest, and so they don't necessarily do the same jobs. Which could be interesting, definitely. However, it could also be the opposite in that in Victoria 2, the politics, you had the different things. So, for example, someone might support moralism as a policy. Is devout a replacement for that? And would that replacement be a good thing? I don't know. And then finally, law enforcement. So less likely to have radicals from standard of living problems, and less penalties from turmoil. So that feels more like it reduces penalties for certain bad things rather than giving you good things, which kind of makes sense. So reading through all that, this seems more like the a little bit like the social laws, except it doesn't look like, I can't see anything here that looks like Victoria 2. Where Victoria 2, you had to get your upper house to approve social reforms. And this does not seem like, I can't see anything about an upper house and doing that. You would think that they would show the upper house here if that were the case. Maybe they just haven't added that yet, but that's definitely interesting that that's missing, because I really like that stuff. So, that not being there. Now, this is the part that shows some of this stuff, and again, I don't see an upper house and a lower house kind of stuff. I just see government, which is interesting that that's the same thing. Something you'll also notice is these are not names of parties in the UK. We are still in the UK, right? If we look over this side as well, these look like they might be parties. Colours on there. But if you look at the bottom here, previous election results, intelligentsia and petty bourgeoisie, these do not look like parties at all. I mean, is there a party called the Armed Forces Party? Maybe. Maybe there's also a party called the Anglican Church Party, but this kind of looks more like, again, Stellaris faction system, which is one of those things that I just kind of was never really that into. It didn't seem to really add much, and it looks like this isn't just a case of adding some, like, you know, Stellaris added this faction system that I don't really care much for. This looks more like it has supplanted an existing very nice political system with something else. Also, something to note on, get to that one next. Here, active interest group traits and this kind of stuff. I don't know what that means. One thing I do notice is that they have the male symbol with small female, which is probably evil misogynist trait or something. And they all have a bunch of these. I'm not going to go over all of those because we'll be here all day. But interesting that they make the king a specific thing, because that was something that was basically ignored in Victoria 2. Even mods that did it didn't give you a specific king, but just like a generic, oh, the king has this personality kind of thing, which I liked because it wasn't a... Victoria 2 is not a person game, okay? The thing that makes Crusader Kings great is that it is very much, you know, CK2 is very much a person game. It's about the people. This Victoria never is about individual people, and that's fine. It works well for the game. Obviously, it's too early to give too much of an opinion either way. And here we have the auto memes. And look, it's a city. Doesn't that look nice? They have marginalized groups. Isn't that based? They have a bunch of states with population. Woo. Yep. So there's the screenshots done. Now, here, what have we got in the general description? Balancing. Interest in society, earn your place in the sun. Yep. So, agrarian or industrial, which is definitely an interesting way of putting it, because in Victoria 2, that wasn't really a choice. Traditional or radical, that definitely was, but it was more than just traditional versus radical, by far. Peaceful or expansionist. Again, that was definitely something about Victoria 2 that was quite nice, but it wasn't necessarily peaceful or expansionist. You know, not being expansionist doesn't mean you weren't peaceful. And being expansionist, you could still be peaceful. Detailed population groups with their own economic needs and political desires. Well, that's nice that they say that, but how specifically? We will see, we will see. Reform your government and constitution to take advantage of new social innovations, or preserve the stability of your nation by holding fast tradition in the face of revolutionaries. Okay. Again, very broad. Social innovations, does that mean like new... As we saw there, it didn't show ideologies, as it were. Okay, I mean this goes till 1936, so both the commies and the fascies should be showing up at some point. And yet we haven't seen anything related to political parties. How is that going to be represented? Are the ideology groups gone, as it were? And the parties? I mean, we haven't seen the name of a single political party so far, which is odd. You'd think, if you go back up, you know, this is politics overview. You would assume that a politics overview would include the name of the current ruling political party. And yet we don't see anything, we just see like these interest groups or pop groups. You know, okay, the government is currently dominated by clergymen and rural folk. I mean, it is interesting that they're adding a difference between rural and urban, but yeah. And what's that? Research new technology or ideas. Technology and ideas. So, what's happening to the innovation? I liked the innovations. The, random thing of you get your technologies, and then once you've got technologies, you then get these other technologies called innovations that show up randomly once you've got the relevant technologies. I like that, but that's just me, maybe. Deep economic system. How deep? Expand your industry. Taxing the profits to improve national prosperity. Taxing the profits. Okay, so that sounds like the taxation system's being kept intact. That's good. That's genuinely good. Okay, that is genuinely good in my opinion. Import cheap raw materials to cover your basic needs while finding new markets for your finished goods. Yeah, that's basically what happened, except you didn't do the importing. Specifically, your pops did, which makes way more sense. The idea that you'd have to do it. We saw the setting up your own trade routes. I really don't like the sound of that. It does not sound fun. Okay, I'm one of the guys who would I'd either play interventionist or state capitalism. I would rather play laissez-faire. This might sound like heresy, but I would rather play laissez-faire than planned economy for 90% of the countries in the game, because it's just such an ache to have to manage everything about your factories and all that stuff. Adding that to raw resources as well. No thank you. Secure vital goods to fuel your advanced economy and control the fate of empires. Okay, so that just means invade that one province in Africa so that you get the right resource that you do in Victoria 2. Fair. Or maybe it's about influencing into your sphere. Maybe. I hope that's still in there, or something like that. Victoria 2, you really have to play with both expansions. The thing is, Paradox doesn't do an expansion model anymore. It does a lifetime DLC support thing. The thing is, the only way you can sell DLC and add new features is if you don't have those features already. So that's going to be interesting. Play on a grand stage. Use your diplomatic wiles to weave a tangled global web of pact relations, alliances, and rivalries to secure your position on the world stage. Yep. Employ threats, military prowess, and bluffs to persuade enemies to back down in conflicts. That sounds a little bit like the... that sounds a little bit like... What do you call it? Well, Victoria 2 had it. Crisis. That sounds a little bit like the Crisis stuff in Victoria 2. But now you can use threats and bluffs in some ways. I mean, that sounds interesting. But I don't know how you'd make that work in the game. It's obviously not going to work against players. Maybe that's talking about... if they were talking about multiplayer, but that's just like multiplayer anyway. You can do that in any game in multiplayer. So presumably it's something you can do with the AI in some way. That could be interesting. It could also be annoying and a bit weird and gamey and one of those things that is one group of people metas the heck out of, and then they balance the game to fit around those people, which ruins the game for everyone else. I don't know. I do hope not. Increase your economic and military expense at the expense of rivals. Yeah, it's okay. It's a strategy game. Yeah, that's what you do in strategy games. You do increase your economic and military strength at the expense of your rivals. Accumulate prestige in the respect of your rivals who build industry in a higher more an empire abroad. Accumulate prestige, yeah. Yep, Victoria 2 had prestige as well. Does it do the same stuff? No idea. But hey, it's in there. So that's a good start. So, the vision. Now this, I am absolutely 1000% going to use the power of zooming. Oh, it's cookie time. That's nice. Let's see if I can line this up. No, I can't. Hello everyone. Yes, you're seeing this right now. This isn't an April Fool's joke. After all the years and memes, it's here. It's Wiz, and it's a pleasure to release this. Ah, he was game director of Stellaris. Yeah, I did make some comparisons to Stellaris earlier. Maybe this is why. Also working on since 2018. I did remember vague rumours that I think it was Wiz who was working on something, that he got pulled off Stellaris to work on something, and people were saying like, oh well, obviously Victoria 3 confirmed. Yeah, I guess those people were right. So what then is Victoria 3? It's definitely a proper Victoria game. A game with cool focus on autonomy, politics, and internal country management. The iconic Victoria pop system not just includes the core mechanic, but even deeper. Now this is perhaps the best thing that's been said so far. This is definitely, I'm not going to lie, this seems better than the Steam page. Because there are people at Paradox who have said many times that Victoria 2 is their favourite Paradox game. Which is kind of funny because Paradox themselves have seemed like they don't want to talk about Victoria a lot, but obviously this is why, because they've been working on it in the background. And I think, I might be wrong, I think that Wiz was one of the people who made like the final patch for Victoria 2 that was like a bunch of the developers decided in their free time, unpaid, to make an unofficial patch for the game. Just to add some nice things. Like if you play Victoria 2 today, something you'll notice on the decisions is that all of them have a little tick box that means when it's available, if it's ticked it will notify you, and if it's not ticked it won't notify you. And that's part of that unofficial patch which then got made official. And they did that unpaid in their own time just because they like the game. And I think Wiz was on that. So, you know, if this is someone who really does like Victoria 2 a lot, then it's probably someone you can trust with Victoria 3. At the same time, obviously he's working with Paradox and he's, you know, it's his job to sell this game. He gets paid to work on this game and he does better off, generally. You know, you can't really be like, oh yeah, I'm working on Victoria 3, but actually, you know, it's not as good as Victoria 2. He obviously can't say something like that. So you have to balance these things out. You know, it's probably one of the better people for trusting with something like this, but it's like, if it did turn out bad, he couldn't say that. Okay, so you have to keep these things in mind. Victoria 3 is its own game and not an iteration of Victoria 2. Now this is something, I was thinking this earlier today. When I say earlier today, I mean just before I started doing this. They shouldn't have called it Victoria 3 in my opinion, looking at the differences. Because I'm thinking, this game that I've looked at, the screenshots, if this was being done for some other company, unrelated to Victoria, just like, here's a game we've made set in the Victorian era, people would be like, wow, this looks really good. But instead people are going, well, this doesn't look very much like Victoria 2 to me. Okay, this looks weird, this doesn't look right. And that's the problem. It's, in many ways, when you say, we're going to make the sequel to Victoria 2, people think, oh, so it's going to be like Victoria 2 but better? No, it's going to be different. Hold on there. You know, people bought Fallout 4 because they liked New Vegas or they liked 3. Those people, many of them, then did not buy the next Fallout game, 76. Because Fallout 4 disappointed them. They got something very different, but the stuff that they actually cared about. You know, Fallout 4 was a really good, you know, Fallout 4 was a decent first-person shooter, and it had good elements, but for the people who liked Fallout games, it wasn't good at doing that. It did other stuff good. And the part that I worry, and the part that I am in some ways kind of expecting from Victoria 3, is that it's going to be a good game, but it's not going to be something that people who like Victoria 2 want. And I like Victoria 2. And I want a game that is, all I want from Victoria 2, I want better modding support. You know, some of the stuff in there is kind of difficult to work with, or you just can't really do. Like, say, for example, something you can't do is, change the religion of a pop, or the only pops that can convert to any other religion are pagan pops in Africa, and that is hard-coded. So if you have a non-pagan pop, it can never be converted to another religion unless a pop already exists in the same province with the same job of the same nationality. If it doesn't meet all those requirements, it cannot religion convert at all, except by culture converting instead. And if it can't culture convert, then it can't religion convert at all. And even for pagan pop, it's only in Africa, I believe. So that's hard-coded. So if you don't specifically use the Africa thing, then you just can't do it. Now, obviously, that was done for performance reasons, but what if you want to, say, make a mod that is specifically for beefy computers? You know, maybe you've got a beefy computer and you want to be able to, you know, go nuts, right? You want to make a mod for that. Well, you can't. And that's the kind of thing that I'd like in Victoria 3. And, like I say, they've shown a couple of things. You know, just one of the things, if I look at this one again, the Workplace Safety Office having, like, what do they call it, mortality rate, or education seeming to have more of a focus on conversion, you know, that implications that there'd be more mechanics behind those. That seems interesting. That's an interesting addition, but it's the kind of thing where it's like, I want Victoria 2, but with these nice additions. I don't want a new game. I want Victoria 2, but better. And they're straight up saying here that that's not what we're getting. And so that makes me a bit, making games more accessible so we can use that accessibility to build an even deeper game for old and new players alike. Accessibility is one of those words where it's like, well, what do you mean by accessibility? Is accessibility like having easy to read fonts? Is accessibility having colours so that the colorblind can read it? Is accessibility having in-game tutorials? Is it having better interface? Is it explaining things better? Is it making the interface more manageable? Or is it dumbing down the game? Or is it changing the gameplay in ways that are not as deep anymore? They say we want to build an even deeper game. Again, what does that mean? Now, the vision is to create a society sim, a game that's first and foremost about the internal workings of the 19th century country they're playing and how society is shaped over the course of the game. That's good. That's what Victoria 2 was. Politics, economy, and diplomacy, three most important parts of the game. Wars are, of course, a part of the game, but Victoria 2 is not a war game or a game about map painting. Thank you. I hate map painting. It's why I gave up on Imperator very quickly. The game's about map painting. It's why I don't play Hearts of Iron anymore, because the options you have are single player map painting or getting shouted at in multiplayer because you didn't use heavy tanks as South Africa. Okay, is that still the meta? Right, the one time I played South Africa in a multiplayer game, that was the meta, and so someone was, you know, obviously jokingly, those are really your options, map painting or meta. Okay, I'd rather have neither. And that's Victoria 2, you couldn't map paint because it was just too difficult. You couldn't map paint as most nations in Victoria because it was basically impossible. And you couldn't play a meta because there is no meta because no one understands the economy. Which I like, which is very realistic, actually. That's a very authentic economic system, having one that we can't understand properly. The Crystal Palace is what you find at the centre of the Crystal Maze. There's no mana. So, mana. This is something that got brought up with Imperator, and sometimes also gets brought up with EU4. And to talk with the EU4 side, mana of itself is not necessarily the problem. For example, using Diplo points to culture convert is not a problem, because how does it work? You spend the, Diplo points, and then you wait some time for it to culture convert, and then after a period, it's culture converted, which for the mechanics of that game works fine. Okay, I wouldn't want that in Victoria, but it works fine for that game. And if you cancel it, then you might get a portion of those points back, depending on the situation. However, there's other things that technically aren't mana, but are much worse. And these are what you might call the idle game features. The buttons that you have to click every 20 in-game years. You press the button, and then you wait 20 in-game years, and then you repeat. And mana is kind of a problem, but that's also something that could potentially be a problem. And it's one of those things where I look at the trade routes thing for the China stuff, and it kind of makes me go, ugh, what is that going to be? It's the kind of thing that I think is probably best just let the pops handle it, as it were. And then finally they've got the 4 game design pillars. National gardening. Building, shaping, tweaking, evolving your nation. The game should never rely on war to provide the main source of enjoyment. I mean, yeah, that's something that sets Victoria 2 apart from pretty much all other strategy games. They're basically all, war is the thing that makes it enjoyable. The stuff outside of war is just done for war. Total War is a good example of this. Good part of the name. Diplomatic eminence. War is a continuation of diplomacy, and everything that's achieved by war should also be achievable through diplomacy, even though diplomacy sometimes comes at the point of a gun. Yeah, makes sense. Being able to get land through diplomacy is definitely an interesting thing. Reminds me of a couple of mods I've seen for Victoria 2. I definitely think that's an interesting way of doing it. Good way to prevent map painting. Everything is political. Politics is the heart of Victoria 3, and no major features should come in the way of tiebacks to the pops and interest groups that form the core against politics. So it does look like parties are being replaced by interest groups, which is interesting, but I think you should, even if you're going to have interest groups, you still need to have parties. It just makes sense that the parties, you should still have, like, either parties or ideologies. You don't necessarily have to have both, but you should have, you know, if you're going to have these interest groups, you should have at least one of the other two as well. Okay? Governments aren't run by interest groups. Okay? Sometimes you can have an interest group that is on both sides of the aisle. Okay? For example, in America, I think the majority of both Democrats and Republicans are in some way related to, like, I can't remember what it's called, but it's like a pro-Israel thing. And most Democrats and most Republicans are supporters of that. That is an interest group, but it's on both sides of the aisle. Whereas, as we saw in the screenshot earlier, it looks more like an interest group is in charge of the government here, and it's just like all of the Anglican Church here and all of rural folk here. And it's just like, yeah, the Anglican Church just generally supports the government and rural folk support it, and all these others just oppose the government in some way. Now, I was going to say something along the line... Now, I had just thought something along the lines of, oh, well, this is a monarchy, so maybe it doesn't have parties as such, and that's, like, only if you do, like, a democracy kind of thing, it'll have parties, but it's a HM's government, which is Victoria to speak for a constitutional monarchy like Britain, which, funnily enough, is who this is. And so parties definitely should be a part of it, not being there. Again, maybe they just haven't added that here. Maybe it'll be in an upcoming expansion, or DLC, or free patch. Maybe a mixture of the last two. Era of change. The Victorian era was a time of immense change politically, technologically, culturally, militarily, and socially, and these changes are reflected in the experience of playing a campaign in Victoria 2. Yes, to an extent. You know, you're going from using hussars to planes, biplanes in Victoria 2, but not fancy steampunk airships, please. I don't want that. That's all for this week, and next week's talking about Victoria pop system and introduction of dependence. I have no idea what dependence is supposed to be. Return of the pop system is definitely going to be interesting to see how that shows up. A lot more exciting news. Yep, official website. I'll take a quick look at the official website, and if it's not interesting, I won't include it. Okay, so the website requires you to accept the cookies to look at it, and I'm too lazy to do that, so I think I'll just leave this one here. Overall, It definitely looks interesting. As I say, this to me looks like, if this was not Victoria, if this did not have the Victoria label, if this was not made by Paradox Interactive, well, maybe even if it was made by Paradox Interactive, but definitely not with the Victoria label, but not the Victoria label, this is a game that I think people would be like, that looks interesting. This looks like it could be a cool thing. You know, since Victoria 3 isn't being made, right, since they're never going to make Victoria 3, obviously, this looks like it's not the same, but it looks very interesting. But instead, is Victoria 3. And so obviously, someone like myself who wants Victoria 2 Plus, I'm not going to get Victoria 2 Plus, and so I'm immediately going to look at it negatively. Okay, that's just a matter of fact. The fact that this game is not Victoria 2 Plus. It's not fixing the problems I have with Victoria 2 and not changing anything else. This is, as they say, it's the core values. And those values are definitely a nice starting point, but, you know, saying that you want to stick to the core values can give you something great like Ghostbusters, or it can give you something like that one Ghostbusters remake. My opinions on this after, you know, properly looking at this are not overall negative. I don't think this will be a bad game. I'm still not convinced that this will be the game that I'm personally looking for. Will I play it? I don't know yet. It will be interesting to look at the upcoming dev diaries talking about how the pop system works, because that is one of the things that I was a bit worried about in the screenshot here, where it has these numbers in the bottom left that look kind of like Stellaris-y pops, and it works for Stellaris. That's not what I'm looking for in Victoria. Anyway, until looking at the rate that I do these things, probably in a couple years' time, ta-ra.